There he is. Hi.
Hey, what's going on?
How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me. This is great.
I'm so excited to talk to you. But first, I know you're on baby watch. Any news?
Nope, no news yet. We're still waiting, and I feel like this thing could happen at any moment. So we're just like prepared.
Okay, so if you have to jump off, I got it. I get it. If I totally understand, and good luck. I think it's
going to be great. We're pretty excited.
You should be awesomely excited, pretty excited. You're about to kind of have the greatest experience of your life. So says she, 4 kids later, all adults, and it all be behind me. So I'm really, I'm thrilled about that. But let me begin with you talking about yesterday. I wanted to start as I watched President Biden. I wanted to get your take. I watched several interviews you did, but I wanted everybody here to hear you assess President Biden's speech. Was it the right tone? Did he say the right things? Anything about it surprise you?
Yeah, I think it was the right tone. You always have to be careful when you're the president of the United States. Obviously, the last president had no problem going back in time and taking shots. We don't want to do that, but there are moments when I think it's appropriate. And so I think Joe Biden, even if I disagree with him on policies, has shown himself to be making an effort to bring back normalcy to the presidency. It doesn't have to be an entertainer. But this was a moment where it's not like it was just a crisis in the past. It is an ongoing crisis. And January 6th, in and of itself, it was a bad day. What I worry about is less about that day and more about the fact that the conditions that led to that day haven't changed. So I thought he struck the right tone. I don't think he's going to change anybody's minds because I'm not sure what will, but it was the right thing to do.
That's what I wanted to ask you. My second question was, do you think he swayed anybody? And if not, what do you think, Congressman, would actually sway somebody at this point in our nation's history?
Oh, man, I wish I had the best answer for that. So first off, I'm not sure he swayed anybody, but keep in mind, even though we see polls and you see the numbers seem pretty static in terms of the number of people that believe the election was stolen or wasn't, I think the good number to look at is something like 60, it should be 100%, but 60 or 70% of Americans believe Joe Biden was legitimately elected, which, by the way, he was.
Correct.
And that is obviously an important number going forward for elections. What is going to change people's minds? I think some of it can be time. I think the work of the January 6th committee, putting out the lies, the conspiracies that have gone to this, is important. I think that's important, yes, for today, also for history books written in 5 or 10 years. But I think all we can do is continue to call out lies, call out conspiracy. And one of the things I've been trying to do is, if you notice in every fundraising appeal, there's like, send me $20, otherwise your whole family's probably going to die from the other side's policies, right? And that's not too much of an exaggeration. I think it's important for us to call out the abuse that is being done to people. You think of somebody on Social Security and a fixed income. Well, if they believe that their life is at stake or their kid's life is at stake, they'll part with anything, including their money, to defend that. So I think exposing these tactics, and I also think, just quickly, the day has changed where in the past it used to be, don't call out conspiracies because you just give them life, right?
Right.
And so 2 years ago, I called out QAnon, and a bunch of people would say to me, oh, you're just giving QAnon attention. The problem is in this new media environment where there's social media and all these things in the back, you're not giving any of that life. The life already exists. And I think what's important is to call those lies out early while they're still in their infancy.
I read the op-ed you wrote the other day where you said that, a year ago, you thought kind of solving the democracy issue, solving this toxic environment would take several months. Now you realize not only is it the work of your lifetime, but that it's going to take several years. For people who are kind of one step removed from everything going on in Washington, how do people begin to help, whether it's you or others, restore democracy, restore a civil environment, help with the toxicity?
So it's a good question. I'm going to make a quick plug for my organization, Country First.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, I follow that. Country First is Adam's organization. You can follow it on Twitter, which I do. And your whole philosophy, well, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, my whole philosophy on that is we need to call out lies. Right. We have to use anger in the right way, which is anger that talks about truth and not anger that creates just unnecessary fear to raise money. But what we're getting ready to launch is an initiative called Primary First, which is, first off, yes, I think we need to change the primary system in this country. Now, laying that aside, because that's a medium to long-term goal.
Right. And you're talking about gerrymandering there.
Yeah.
And also, yeah.
And the fact that, you know, if it's let's say it's a super Republican or a super Democratic district, the general election, yes, it matters, go vote. But in reality, the decision for who's going to represent you in Congress, for instance, is made in the primary. Well, nobody votes in primaries, only the parties most hardcore. And that's why each of the parties, instead of in the past, when the parties kind of pulled everybody to the middle because they had power, now they're having to go and I guess placate the extremes among us. So the question is, how can you help? I think it's two things. On the bigger level, or I guess on the organizational level, find organizations to be involved with. I think that help things like reforming the primary system or getting involved in the primary system with sane and normal people. I think on the personal level, and this is what I think is most important, is look at your own personal behavior, right? First off, if you're somebody that makes friends based on their politics, like, I actually think making friends based on what they believe about the role of government is probably one of the most stupid and asinine ways to make a friend. I make friends based on who I like to go drinking with or who I share common interests with, not based on do they share my role of government. But I also think find somebody that you can get along with a different political viewpoint and just listen to them. Don't try to convince them because you're not going to, but listen to them and understand that the far right, the far left, and everybody in between, if you boil it down, they all have the same fear. The fear is that the country's going to leave them behind, right? Conservatives believe, well, the country's going to leave behind middle America. You know, the left believes the country's going to leave behind minorities and underrepresented, you know, groups. Get to understand that fear. And then in your own personal Twitter behavior, Instagram behavior, try to be more constructive. Now, I wish I could say I had the silver bullet. I don't think anybody does, because it took us a long time to get to this position. It may take a long time to get out, but we can.
So what you're saying also to kind of step back is to get involved really locally, because we all focus on presidential elections. And while they're critical because they determine the Supreme Court, they determine really everything about our country, getting involved locally, getting involved in primaries, getting involved in city councils, in school boards, working for those people, that you're saying is a critical place to start. Also, let's talk a little bit about the role of the media. I've been in journalism for 40 years, grew up in a political family. We had Republicans and Democrats at our house all the time. They worked together, they were civil. We don't see that at all anymore. And many people put the blame, not just at political leaders in Washington, but also increasingly at the foot of the media, catering to kind of both extremes. What is the role of the media? How do you think the media in this new year should adjust to seeing the middle, speaking to the middle, representing the middle, spending more time covering the middle?
It's a great question. And, you know, part of the problem is journalism is now a profit-driven enterprise, right? And so you go from, I'm going to cover a story which may be boring to people but necessary, you know, what did your city council do, to what is going to get headlines. And you see in all these stories, it's like, you know, here the outrageous thing Donald Trump said, or here the outrageous thing Joe Biden said. And it doesn't tell you what it is in the headline because you need to click on it, right? I would love to see journalism go to a point of saying, we have to represent all sides. Now, when I say that, I don't mean we have to represent to an extent the side of insurrectionists, because that is different, right? But we have to represent the viewpoints of people all across America. Right. I think it's if there was a moral responsibility to say, yes, we can make money doing news, but that can't be the driving focus And then the other thing, let's think in terms of Fox News, for instance.
Or the Fox Channel.
Or the Fox Channel.
Fox Channel.
That's a great point. If Tucker Carlson or Sean Hannity is texting, the White House chief of staff, and they're like buddies, that needs to be known. I think that should be disclosed by the news agency. But I also think if there's a show on at night, for instance, that is an opinion show, I would like to see that clearly labeled. Because what happens is...
labeled as opinion as opposed to journalism, as opposed to news.
That's right. Because if Sean Hannity, for instance, says he'll start with kind of a news story and roll into opinion, and, we can tell the difference. There's a lot of people that look at that and that all mashes in their mind as news. But
I think that's a really important point. I began in the news business where you were not allowed under any circumstances to give your opinion. That's not why you were hired. It's why you got fired. And so I think so much of what we see on both sides of the news business today is opinionated news business. And so I hear so many people, especially my children, saying, I just want the news. I don't want somebody to tell me what they think. That's not why I turn it on. But I think kind of stepping back and saying, yes, there is a lack of civil discourse in Washington. That needs to get better. There needs to be better journalism that covers the wide dearth of views, or the expansion of all of these views. But there really has to be an intention, a willingness in Washington, right, to get things done. And people don't seem to understand, if so many people agree on gun reform, if so many people agree on voting rights reform, why can't you guys and gals come to a solution that works for the vast majority of the country?
It's very simple, because let's take the gun rights debate, okay?
Right.
Now, I'm very pro Second Amendment, but I also recognize, you have to be 21 to own a handgun. You should have to be 21 to own and buy a rifle, like an AR, at least, right? We can talk about whether or not they should be banned or there should be a special license, and I'm even open to that. But let's take what we should do in the least. I also believe in universal background checks for guns, okay? Yeah. The problem is these groups, whether it's the NRA, or the one that's even more radical, the Gun Owners of America, they end up with a giant amount of people that support them. And their whole narrative is, we are going to defend your Second Amendment rights. Now, it used to be that defending Second Amendment rights meant you should still be able to own a personal firearm. You should be able to go hunting, defend yourself. Now it's turned into almost military weapons.
But there are a vast majority more people that support sensible gun reforms than are in those lobbying organizations.
That's right. But those lobbying organizations make sure that they turn out voters where? In primaries. And so
coming back to primaries.
That's right. Because it's only 10% of the entire district that's voting in a primary, and it's the people that are most committed to these issues. And instead of leaders, and so I'm in a leadership position. The problem is most people have forgotten that part of leadership is leading, right? Yes, you have to get reelected, but you also have to lead. And if you see something like sensible gun reforms as making a difference, we can also talk about mental health. They're not exclusive. You have to lead and tell people why, because nobody else is.
Let me back up a second, because as I mentioned, I grew up at a time when Republicans and Democrats spoke to one another, had a focus. Reagan, who the Republicans talk about all the time, was very close friends with Tip O'Neill. They got together after, working together, and they really had a great working relationship. And it behooves the country to have two strong parties. What are you going to do, or how do you resurrect, or move the Republican Party forward so that it's respectable again, that it's solid again, that it has serious people in it again, people who want to work across the aisle, who want to put country first?
So I think we need to elect moderates in the Republican Party.
How do you do that if the primaries are geared towards extremists?
You can do that and take the lesson of Donald Trump, where Donald Trump ran and he didn't have a natural base of Republicans. but he pulled a lot of people into the Republican primary to vote for him, and then it caught fire, right? And by the way, it's embarrassing for me to say I'm a Republican, by the way. I would consider myself now a Republican in the venue that you and I remember, not in the venue of what it's become today. But so you look at what that's done. I think the right candidates, so it's not going to come from the party down. If a good moderate candidate runs in a district, 5 miles north of me, the suburbs of Chicago, where it's still 4 degrees, by the way.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's awful. But they can go out and win. And the key, though, is not just winning. It's then going to Congress and carrying out those in practice. In 2012, I had a member primary. So basically, I was drawn in with another Republican member of Congress, and we had a primary. I ended up beating him, not by trying to be more conservative, because I'm not, but by just telling the truth to people. And at least 10 years ago, that's what they respected.
But now here you are kind of saying, I'm not going to do this anymore. So you're saying we need moderates, we need people who want to have a strong Republican Party that works across the aisle, that gets things done. Oh, but by the way, I'm splitting.
Yeah. It's a great question, and there's 3 basic reasons why I'm not running again. First is I was drawn in the remap with another Republican member of Congress again. So that happened to me 10 years ago, and it happened this time. Going through that is not fun. But secondly, and I think even without this, it wouldn't have been an issue. It wouldn't have changed my mind. I will have been in Congress 12 years at the end of this term. I think that's enough for a lot of people. If you're staying in to 20 years or to 30 years in Congress, you better be a committee chairman or have a reason to make a difference besides, I just don't want to go anywhere else, which a lot of people turn into. They don't know what life would be like after Congress. I think no matter what the environment was, I would probably not be running again. And I think just as importantly, if I was running for re-election, but also trying to fight this broader fight nationwide against extremism, against, all that, it would be really hard to do. You can't do that. You can't both have a re-election message and then try to fight broader nationwide. And so I looked at it and go, where can I make the most impact? And yeah, the old school says you need to stay in office to make an impact. I actually believe with this new environment, new way to reach people, you can make the same or bigger impact, having been a former member, seeing what's going on, and now committing full time to changing the environment.
So what is the impact you're looking to make? If Country First is successful, if you're successful 5 years from now, how does our country look different? How does the Republican Party look different?
I think if I'm successful in 5 years, the party will be more focused on drawing people that attract 51+% of Americans. So that will include moderates in moderate districts, right? People that aren't out lying and throwing bombs at people. I think conspiracy theories are going to be the downfall of this country if we're not careful. So I want to see conspiracy theories widely discredited again and not drawn in. And I would love to see, this is very pie in the sky, but I'd love to see people get along again. I made news accidentally about a year ago after I voted to impeach President Trump, when part of my dad's cousins, so part of my family, disowned me in a letter. And they told me I was part of Satan's army, and that kind of stuff. And I didn't intend for that to get out, but I'm glad it did, because I think it showed the American people, and frankly, people around the world, I know we have a lot of international viewers, what's happening. If you're cutting off your family because of their politics, something's wrong there. Like, something needs to change. So I'd love to see that.
But what needs to change? Because there's so many families that I speak to who are actually, didn't go home for the holidays, even last year, even more, talking about this because of different political views, because they couldn't understand how a family member might have a different viewpoint, or they had family members who had become radicalized or extreme. And so, like, how do we fix that? That's really what I'm interested in. Like, how do we just kind of find our way with two strong parties, with people who can respectfully disagree, who know how to listen, who put their country first. How do we get to that place?
Well, I think you and I are doing some of that now. I think the
Right.
most important thing is to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's people recognizing in their own lives where that's happening. Now, look, I want to be clear. If you have a family member that's toxic, right, that, is trying to fill your head with conspiracy theories and is trying to manipulate you, don't take that. That's not what I'm saying. But if there's something where you just don't like that they voted for Biden or Trump, I think the recognition of that is the start. Because, look, I don't believe there is nothing that can happen from Congress or the presidency that is going to change people's attitudes, right? Government just creates policy, it defends the country, and it reflects people's views. The change has to truly start among people. And I'm going to tell you, I am sensing, not as fast as I would have liked to, but I am sensing that there is an exhaustion that is settling among people, that their eyes are far more open than they were a year ago or 2 years ago to this problem. And I think the key is we have to recognize those increment changes, because again, it took us 20 years to get here. I certainly hope it doesn't take 20 years out, but it's going to take some time. And I think talking about it, and like with my organization talking about it, you talking about it, that is essential to disinfecting that problem.
I love that. Representative Cheney has said repeatedly that Donald Trump has no business ever being anywhere near the Oval Office ever again, and that she will do everything within her power, within her capabilities to make sure that that doesn't happen. Is that a viewpoint you share as well?
100%. So regardless of what you feel about his policies, some I agreed with, some I disagreed with, his destruction to democracy and to self-governance, it cannot be repeated. We can't sustain another thing like that. So to govern yourself, so we see what's happening right now in Kazakhstan and unstable places around the world. If you feel that your view is not being heard, it ultimately will lead to violence. That's just a fact. And you see that in every regime and even in self-governance. Mm-hmm. The basic compact that we have to have between the far right, the far left, and everybody else is that if you vote, your vote's going to count, and it's going to be counted accurately. Right. Donald Trump did everything he could to undermine that faith, that compact, for one reason: his own fragile ego, because right. He doesn't want people to think he's a loser. If he gets back in the office, it'll be detrimental, and I'll do everything I can to prevent that from happening.
So I was listening to the chairman of the commission last night in an interview, and he said, look, it is really critical that we get the work of this committee, this commission, right. There's a lot riding on this. The eyes of the world are on this. We've got to get it right. How much pressure is on you guys, all of you, to get this absolutely 100% right? And do you think the commission, perhaps the televised hearings of the commission, will rock this country, will sway people, will open their eyes in a way that perhaps they haven't been opened?
Yeah, I think it's A, extremely important, B, there's a lot of pressure on us, and C, it certainly can change the way that people see things. So I always have said, I deal a lot with international politics. That's kind of what I like. And, deal with struggling democracies. And after January 6th, they'd ask me, how can you come talk to us, right? It's an accurate question. I always say, though, democracies aren't defined by bad days, because they're going to have bad days. Mm-hmm. They're defined by how they come back from those bad days. And this January 6th commission is so important to how we come back from a bad day. We have to lay the narrative out, the story out to the American people and to the world in a way that makes sense, in a way that that grabs their attention, mm-hmm. and also shows planning and information behind the scenes that nobody knew happened or that conspiracies tried to discredit. So if we know, and we don't have the answer to this, the one thing I'm very interested in is, what did Donald Trump know about January 6th prior to January 6th?
So what did he know, and when did he know it, and what did
That's
he
right.
know? Yeah.
That's right, because all of a sudden his speech saying we're going to march to the Capitol, we have to be tough, all that means something different if he knew there was potentially going to be violence than if he didn't. I think at the least he was incompetent with his oath and indecisive. But the worst case, obviously, he knew and incited, which I personally believe, but I want to let the facts dictate. And when you lay that out for the American people, and I think just as importantly, you lay out how close we actually came to a bigger crisis, that can grab people's attention.
But you're saying, do you have the facts that you've been able to assemble to date stunned you?
Yeah, a number of them have. Some I can't talk about because I don't want to get ahead of the committees talking about them.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, real interest in what is the role of foreign governments to foment this? Where did the money for some of this come from? Questions like all the donations. I think the Stop the Steal kind of fundraising thing between the election and January 6th raised like $220 million. And this isn't from all rich people. These are from people on a fixed income. And almost none of that money went to actually do anything to stop, quote unquote, the steal. So I think that corruption, the self-dealing, that kind of stuff is not just surprising, it's surprising how brazen some of it was.
So do you think do you think Donald Trump fears this commission, this committee?
Oh, 100%. And you can tell in his various press releases about it. Calls it, he's like a fourth grader, unselect committee, all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. He fears it. If he didn't fear it, he wouldn't be worried about it, but he's quite worried.
Yesterday, much was made of the image of Representative Cheney and her father, former Vice President Dick Cheney, being the only two Republicans on the floor during the moment of silence. What did that say to you? And I know people were like, where was Adam Kinzinger? And you're like, I'm on baby watch. So I just want, for people who didn't hear him say that, that's where he is and where he was. But what does that say to you? Was that a heartbreaking moment for you?
It was sad. I think, keep in mind, we were in pro forma session. Pro forma session is usually we never go to pro forma session. All that means is they basically gavel in, say a prayer, say the pledge, gavel out. But given that it was January 6th, right. Obviously it was more important. I wish I'd have seen more Republicans there. It was sad not to. I'm glad Liz and her father were there. I wish I was, but obviously I couldn't be.
Did you talk to any Republicans about why they didn't go?
No, I've gotten beyond, because I know they'll either give me an excuse or something, and I just don't even need to hear it anymore. And so it was sad, but it is what it is. We move forward. And I think the other thing to keep in mind and why this is so important, we are facing real challenges in the world. We have Russia with 100,000 troops on the border of Ukraine. An invasion could be imminent, with the exception of Kazakhstan's taken some of their attention. We have a rising and resurgent China, Iran, a lot of challenges around the world. And if we're spending our time fighting each other, and obsessed with some of these stupid debates that exist and these conspiracies, our enemies are taking the time to move in on our allies and move in on our interests. And we can't afford that.
I saw you on the Fox channel the other night where you talked, you answered a question that was focused on you being a pariah. That was the word in the Republican Party. And you said at that moment, and if I'm not paraphrasing or not quoting exactly, I'm very proud of the stance I've taken. And I want my children to be proud of me when they look at this moment in our history. How difficult has this been personally for you, for your family?
It's been difficult. My wife she was in the political business. She gets it. She's, as in on this mission as I am. So that's helpful. But yeah, I mean, you take anything. I've been interested in the Republican Party since I was 6 years old, which is weird. And anytime you get kind of moved out or you've seen your party move on and it feels isolating, there's a personal kind of disappointment and not loneliness, but kind of that isolation. But I would not change a thing I've ever done, because particularly in the last year or so, because I think this is so important to the future of this country. I think everybody that has enabled what's going on will be judged in history. And I'm not doing this for the history books, but I think Liz and I will be adjudicated well. And I say that because history typically gets it right. And
Yeah.
so I'm proud of it. I'm proud of what we've done.
Why would you advocate to somebody to run for office today? People say like, whoa, I would never do that. It's brutal. My family would be destroyed. They don't pay you anything. It's 24/7. People attack you all the time. There's nothing good that comes of it. What's your response to that?
My response is, first off, if you have it burning in your heart, that's the only time you should run, if it's something you really want to do. But we need good people in Congress, right? If it's not you, it's going to be somebody, whether it's Congress, State House, anything. Mm-hmm. If it's not you, it's going to be somebody else, and probably somebody without your passion to do the right thing. So it is an opportunity for public service. It's not that long. You don't ever have to run again, but it's an opportunity to make an impact and make a real difference out there. And I would encourage people to do it. But here's the other thing. The other key is make a commitment to yourself prior to taking office, if you win, that you will not compromise your basic beliefs and principles. When I got elected, I had just gotten back from the war in Iraq, and I made the decision. I said, look, people have died for this country, and young people have died for this country. I have to be willing to give a career for the exact same cause. And I think that's important to keep in mind.
Who are your heroes?
Man, I have a lot of heroes, but some that stick out. I know this is cheesy, but not cheesy, but it's just kind of overused, but I mean it. I think Abraham Lincoln is one of my big ones, at least in politics, because look at Abraham Lincoln, who it would have been easy for him to say, as the Civil War was getting ready to kick off, just sue for peace with the South. Like, I don't want to deal with this. It's a new experiment. And he didn't. And he didn't for 4 years, despite all the casualties coming in. And I think a more modern day one for me is certainly John McCain. I got to know him, and we became friends. And John McCain was somebody who, I could even argue with him on certain issues. I agreed with him on everything when it came to foreign policy, but he's somebody that didn't hide what he believes. He would go out and argue for it, and they called him a maverick for a reason. I respected that. He was a good friend of mine, and he's a modern day hero.
That's wonderful. Well, Adam, thank you so much for joining us. I want to remind people that your new organization is called Country First. You can find it on Adam's Twitter. It has its own Twitter. You can go on there, and it talks about democracy, and it talks about the work that he's doing, that the organization is doing. So, and
country1st.com is the website too. Go check it out.
Country1
ST, like first, but the number one.
Okay, great. And we're going to put this up in the Sunday paper. We'll direct you to that. And so I want to thank you so much. Good luck with your expanding family.
You bet.
And thank you for all the work. Somebody here says I just donated. So
well, thank you.
There you go. And I hope we can continue this conversation, because I'm always looking to talk to civil-minded Republicans. I was a Democratic First Lady in a Republican administration here in California, so I know what it's like to work across the aisle, and I then re-registered as an independent. But there are a lot of people who want to see two strong parties, who want to have civil conversations, and I love that we can model that here today. So thank you.
I agree. You did a great job as First Lady, and you're doing a great job still, so thank you.
Thank you, Adam. God bless you, and take care.
You too.